All right. So just a little bit of information about the pelvic floor. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience in yoga classes over the years, but I remember doing a yoga training years ago, and one of my teachers said we were discussing Mula Bandha, which is, the bandhas of the body are these kind of like binds or locks that you can do to kind of create pressure or support, and we often do them within the realms of pranayama, but also just in regular asana. And Mula Bandha is the pelvic floor lock or the pelvic floor bind, where you kind of lift and engage the pelvic floor muscles. Um, Mula means root, so it's that root chakra kind of hold. And one of my teachers said, when someone asked, when should you be engaging Mula Bandha in your asana practice? And she said, you should engage Mula Bandha 24/7. And I was kind of surprised, like 24/7, even when you're sleeping, and there was just this consensus years ago in the yoga realms that you should always be engaging your Mula Bandha in your asana practice as well as just in your everyday life. And there couldn't be anything more erroneous, in my opinion, than trying to engage something 24/7, anything in your body. Um, so whenever we engage something all the time, like if you held your bicep in flexion all the time, never let it go, your biceps would eventually get weak, that it wouldn't be able to support the way it's meant to, because constant tension on a muscle ultimately creates weakness.
I was simultaneously online on can I call you? Can you call me back in just an hour?
Yeah, of course I can.
All right, sweetie.
All right, I just muted everybody. Sorry, Christine. I think I had unmuted you earlier. Okay, so when you engage these muscles all the time, ultimately your pelvic floor is going to get weak. And this can be unconscious. We can have unconscious tension patterns that we're not even aware that we're guarding and holding our pelvic floor muscles. They're very responsive to stress. They're part of that, kind of flight or fight mechanism of unconscious hypervigilance and hypertonicity that we can gain in our body. And ultimately, this can lead to weakness, which the tightness and the weakness loop can create all sorts of problems with our pelvic floor. We can have low back pain, we can have hip pain, we can have pain with intercourse, we can have constipation, we can have just pelvic floor pain. There's all sorts of problems that can arise from a pelvic floor that's not supple and responsive. And then, of course, it's the bottom of our container of our support for our core. So if you think of the core of your body as a cylinder, the top is your diaphragm, the bottom is your pelvic floor, and the sides are your transverse abdominis, the muscles, your obliques too, but all the muscles that kind of wrap around the core of your body. And we need all of those parts of our cylinder to support us when we need that intra-abdominal pressure to press against our spine for the support, kind of to create some stiffness along the lumbar spine whenever we're doing something like lifting a heavy load. But if we're always engaged in these muscles, not just the pelvic floor, but your diaphragm or your abdominal muscles, if you're like always sucking it in and guarding and holding, you're just going to get tension and weakness, not a responsive adaptation to what the environment around you needs, what you need in response to your environment at any moment in time. So one of the challenges of our yoga practice is to understand our patterns, to notice how we hold our breath and how maybe we grip our abdominal muscles or grip our pelvic floor in response to who knows what, all the conscious and unconscious patterns that we have. So the more we can kind of learn how to just have this fluidity, like waves of an ocean, where we can contract and release and contract and release and have this adaptation where we can be responsive to anything around us. That's what we're really looking for this core stability. And our pelvic floor is part of that core stability. And anyone who has suffered with low back pain, which I think is everybody on the list that's here today, can relate to what it feels like to have your back feel a little unstable. And unfortunately, our go-to is we like squeeze our glutes, or we, kind of like guard down on our core muscles to try to stabilize our spine. When in reality, if we can learn how to have that ebb and flow, this can be a much more natural way of adapting to the support that our spine needs. So, back to the pelvic floor for just a moment. And I'm saying all this just because we're going to do a couple little things in practice today that are going to be about the pelvic floor. So, and I've taught, if you're interested in this, go back into the library. There's lots of classes on the pelvic floor. And I have taught an hour and a half lecture with Yoga Alliance all about the pelvic floor, which I can give you the access to get in there and watch that if you're interested. But the pelvic floor muscles, so you have a few. I wish I had like a little model, but I could get that app up, but I'm not going to. You have muscles that sling from the pubic bone to the tailbone. You have circular muscles, and you have side muscles that go, this direction. There's all sorts of muscles in the pelvic floor to support your organs from below. And one of them that kind of is on an angle is called your obturator. And this muscle is kind of an X marks the spot for a lot of people who have groin pain, hip pain, where you can't really, like, it's diffuse and you can't really figure out where your pain's coming from. This muscle, tension in this muscle can create a host of problems with that whole region. And it's not something that we usually stretch very much. So a lot of the stretching in yoga turns ourselves into external rotation. We are standing poses and things like pigeon pose and reverse pigeon pose and Baddha Konasana, all these poses kind of externally rotate our hip joints, but we do much less to internally rotate our femur bones in the hip joints. And when we internally rotate the femur bones, this obturator gets a stretch. So if you're having a tension pattern for unconscious or conscious reasons in the obturator, making sure that you include some internal rotation of the femur bones in your practice is going to be a surefire way of getting that muscle to release and open up so it can start to have that capacity to be engaged when it needs and release when it's not needed. So yesterday we did a little bit of internal rotation, and we're going to kind of follow along that path a little bit more today to kind of try to dive in. So I'm in one of those moods, where I like to get into the nitty gritty. So come along with me on the ride. So we can find these like hidden little pockets in our body that can help us feel good in our stability. So take a moment to drop your awareness and your attention into your seated posture. Now, one of the best things you can do if you have low back pain or hip pain or pelvic pain is to make sure you're sitting well. So get up, I'm on a bolster, get up on something so that you're not on the ground, which tends to make us slump, so that you can have that long, spacious spine. And once you feel like, oh yeah, feels good. I have a nice neutral spine. My low back feels supported. You might even feel like you're tipped forward just a teeniest bit instead of rolling back on your tail. So find a place of comfort. Notice if you tend to lean into one sit bone or lean into the other. Just kind of find yourself. Find your weight bearing through your pelvic bowl. And then close your eyes so you can sense inward. And let's just imagine the bony landmarks, that kind of diamond of our pelvic floor, as if you're looking down from your crown into the basin of your pelvic floor. Imagine that diamond. So the front of the diamond, the anterior portion of the diamond, is the pubic bone, which of course is not one bone, but two bones that meet at a joint at your pubic symphysis. But that sense of the pubic bone, and then in the most posterior part of your body, your tailbone. And again, just visualizing looking down into the bowl of your pelvis from above. And then your sit bones are the other 2 points of your diamond. So feel, sense into your diamond. And is your diamond, crooked or straight or cocked to one side or tipped? So just sense into your bones for a moment. And then take your bird's eye view, from above, and drop instead your view into what you're sensing, the weight of your sit bones, the feeling of your pelvic floor. And start to feel into your breathing body. So a nice, beautiful spine, feeling that sense of space and length. And as you breathe and allow your diaphragm to release well, start to notice what's happening in your pelvic floor. Can you feel the subtle responsiveness of the pelvic floor diaphragm? Think of that sling of muscles in the bottom of your pelvis that holds your organs in from below as being like your diaphragm, where it can kind of drop down and wide, and it can draw back in and up, and that there's nothing that you have to yank on. You don't have to push and pull and prod and poke, but to just notice the natural movement that's happening as you breathe. And it's subtle. So, turn your interoception on. I've done, many practices over the years of working with the three diaphragms of the body, the Mula Bandha, the Jalandhara Bandha, and the Uddiyana Bandha. But today, let's just kind of sense into this pelvic bowl. Imagine that your pelvis is like ocean waves that can draw toward the shore and away from the shore, or even just a wave that rises in the water and drops in the water. Think of it like a swell of a wave instead of a crash of a wave. This natural responsiveness to that need for intra-abdominal pressure. Imagine the your cylinder of your core, the top and the bottom. And see if you can feel as you inhale this bulging out on the top and bottom, letting that spaciousness come. And then as you exhale, that kind of drawing in of the sides of your cylinder. So imagine this sense of your belly widening so that your diaphragm can flatten and get wide and drop down. So there's lots of room. And as you exhale, that condensement back into the core of the body. So the pelvic floor lifts and the cylinder of your core draws in toward your center line. Just feel that expansiveness and that condensing. So much of the rhythms of our body are this interplay between expansion and condensement. And of course, our breath is this primary rhythm, but feel how the abdominal muscles and your pelvic floor adapt to this need for breath. Let's place our hands together at our heart and take a moment to just draw your attention to the deep center of your mind, your heart, your hands. Breathe well while you're here. And place an intention. How can even just the subtlety of getting to know your deep inner body help you with whatever this intention is that you are cultivating today? Awareness supports many things. Let's relax the hands and find your way onto your mat. So as you stretch out, as we always do in the beginning of your practice, take your time so you can, just kind of get comfortable with your body on the ground. Okay? Stretching out through your spine. Maybe your arms reach overhead and you feel that nice, yummy stretch of lengthening one side and lengthening the other side.
Let's take a moment to let our hips come way offline. So stretch one heel way down as you hike the other hip up toward your shoulder, and then change and do the other side. And just notice how much lateral movement you can find in your pelvis and how that translates all the way through your side body, your low back, your ribs, all the way to your shoulders. You have this beautiful ability to compress one side as we open the other. So just a little back and forth. We're getting to know those muscles on either side of your body. And then bring your knees into your chest and give yourself a little hug. Rock a little bit, just kind of finding some ease. So we're not going to focus on the pelvic floor the whole time here. I want you to kind of sense everything that we do and how it relates to the support of your pelvis, your SI joints, and your back, and your hips. Kind of find it, that global sense of this whole area of your body. Let's hang on to the knees and circle your knees. And chances are you always go the same direction. So just notice that. You don't have to change anything, but just notice this is your pattern. This is a spiral that's more comfortable in your body than the other direction. So as we change directions, notice that. Notice, oh, this pathway is a little less trodden. It's a little less carved out, a little less smooth in our neurology. Don't you wonder how that happens? Like, you made that choice when you were very young that this was the path, this was the primary path, and this is the secondary path. And nobody told you that. It's just what your body chose. All right, let's go ahead and hold our knees in, and let's open our knees away from the middle and bring them back in, kind of getting into the feeling of your hip joints, kind of that crease of the groin, feel, right along the pubic bone, along that whole rim of the hip joints. Just see what you're feeling as you allow your hips to move into a little external rotation and then back to neutral. All right, let's keep the right knee hugged into the chest and stretch your left leg long on the ground, and let's roll about in your ankles, wiggle your toes, and feel that nice freedom that you're cultivating in your feet and in your legs. Give a good snug squeeze of your knee into your chest. And then let's switch, left knee coming in, right leg long on the ground. Keep moving your feet about. Let your head get heavy. Notice how your shoulders and neck, your traps usually want to get involved in just about everything. So let them find a sense of rest as you move your feet. And then give a good squeeze of that knee into your chest. All right, and then we're just going to go back and forth between the two sides. So just kind of waking up some of those core muscles, your hip flexors. Let's go in with one knee and then in with the other knee. Now, if your back is a little sensitive, instead of straightening your leg, just put your foot on the ground as you hug one knee, the other foot comes down onto the ground. So there's always ways to modify some of these movement patterns that might be a little irritating to your back. So pay attention. All right, and then we're going to come have your knees right over your pelvis or a little forward over your chest, whatever feels comfortable for your back. Bring your arms overhead and just kind of hang out here for a moment so you can feel the beginning of waking up some of that deep core support. And we're going to go so small in this movement. And of course, if the arm overhead is a little too much, you can bring your arms out to the sides or down by your side. So your choice on arm position. We're going to rock a little bit, knees to the left, only a little bit, and then a little bit knees to the right. So you might want to change your arm position, just find what feels stable. I'm bringing my arms straight out to the sides. All right, and then this is a tiny movement. This is not like a big swing of your knees like we sometimes do that, belly pose, but really just finding the core muscles in a very small range of motion. Waking up the obliques just a little bit. Maybe you want to increase your distance away from the midline just a little bit more so you can feel those obliques turn on. They're part of this stabilizing system that we're working with today. How's your breath? Have you noticed that you've held your breath? How's your neck and shoulders? Are they wanting to do the work? And then let's go ahead and release our feet onto the ground. And we're gonna open up or not open up, but strengthen, wake up our hip flexors just a little bit more now. So let's go ahead and pick our knees back up, right over our hips or a little forward if that's better for your back. And we're gonna tap one heel down onto the ground and draw that knee back up, and then tap the other knee heel down onto the ground and bring that heel back up. Put your arms in a place that feels supportive to your body. One of the things, go slow enough where you can feel what's happening in the center of your body. Can you feel that cylinder of support around the core of you, so that you're finding, not just the top and the bottom of the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, but the sides, the front, the back, that cylinder of support. So that might include your transverse abdominis, your psoas muscles. There's a lot of support systems that help your spine. How's your breathing? All right, and then let's go ahead and rest and put our feet down onto the ground. Now, the first pathway of some internal rotation to release that obturator muscle, take your feet hip width, or maybe even a little wider than hip width apart, and we'll windshield wiper our knees left and right. Now, we do this a lot in yoga, and often it feels just nice on your low back to release. But part of what is helping release here is that obturator, which is the muscle of the pelvic floor I was talking about earlier. So let's just enjoy. We're going to go into this action a little bit deeper later. For now, just allow your hips to relax in this position, letting your back soften. All right, and then stretch out and lengthen through your body. And then exhale, knees into your chest. Pick up your head and let your back relax into openness. Twice more, feeling a star on the ground as you inhale, and feel that compression, that condensement as you exhale. Enjoy how your whole body comes into extension and how your whole body comes into flexion. Put your feet, both of them, back down onto the ground. Let's pause here for a moment. And we're going to grab a block. So we're going to take the block between our feet. Right. I'm going to show you from this angle so you can see. We're going to take the block this distance, so long distance in between our feet. And you don't have to have your feet over your pelvis. You can have them maybe at a 45-degree angle. And we're going to hold the bottom of our feet on the block. And we're just going to go back and forth between bringing our knees toward each other and opening our knees away from each other. So this is starting to get into some nitty-gritty now. And your feet are going to change their placement on the block a little bit. You'll probably, as your knees come closer, it's going to be harder to keep your feet flat on the block. So just do the best you can. Now, we've already turned on a lot of that core stability. So see if you can maintain a little bit of that as we start to move into the hip joints a little bit more. So moving into that external rotation and then back into neutral. And all of this is going to translate into your SI joints, your low back, your hips, your pelvic floor. It's all interrelated. So even though, you might be feeling pain or discomfort in one area, kind of finding that global support of turning on muscles, releasing muscles, getting adaptive in how you engage. Now you might notice that the block is getting, like you might tip it, you might notice it's hard to keep it stable. And then when you're ready, grab onto that block and stretch your legs straight on the ground for a moment. Just let your hips relax. Take your legs a little wider than hip width apart And with full straight legs, we're gonna rock into internal rotation and to external rotation, just letting your legs go wobble. Nothing's held, just move. All right, so stretch out again to a big star on the ground. And then exhale, knees in. You might feel your hips are a little fatigued already. That's good. Let's go ahead and find our way, rolling onto your side and come up onto all fours. As you move onto all fours, we're going to start with some cat-cows. Okay, so arching and rounding the spine, taking your time, something we do all the time in our practice, and hopefully it just feels really good. So just feel into that movement pattern of flexion. As you flex your spine and round your spine like a scared cat, your pelvic floor, your pelvis will move into a posterior tilt. And then as you arch your back like an old cow and tip the tail, sit bones lifting, your pelvis will move into an anterior tilt. So good to know the difference between anterior and posterior tilting of the pelvis. How's your breath? How's the engagement of the full spine here? And then feel free to wag your tail, to roll around in your ribs or your pelvis, breathing deeply. Whenever you're ready, there's no rush. If you're enjoying moving your spine, come down towards child's pose. And notice if already there's just a little bit more alive awareness in the pelvic floor and the hips than you sometimes have in your practice. And then come back up onto all fours. Let's curl our toes under and lift fully to a dog pose. This extension and length and opening in your body, feel free to pedal your feet, get your legs to open up. You can bend one knee and move your hips around. All right, so ground into your hands. Feel that reaching of your spine. Enjoy this pose. Such a nice full body expression. Feel the roots drop down. Feel the tree rise up of your body. And then come down again onto all fours. We're going to take our block now between our shins. Okay, so, this distance or this distance, your choice, whether you have middle or wide distance between your shins, just what feels comfortable and kind of hip width neutral to you. And we're going to just have a gentle hug on this block. You don't have to engage your adductors, to your fullest extent, but just have a little bit of engagement there. Notice your pelvic floor. So this is very different than just squeezing your butt cheeks to try to stabilize your pelvis when your back hurts. This is activating a whole different set of muscles. So your glutes might turn on, but they're not the primary muscle engagement. Hopefully you can feel a little light shine all the way up into the pelvic floor. Now do a couple rounds of cat-cows where as you move into an anterior tilt to the pelvis, arching your back, you loosen your hold on that block. And as you posterior tilt, you have a little bit of support of that block between your legs. Try not to let your glutes squeeze toward each other. Let your legs squeeze toward each other. Back and forth a couple times. Again, feeling the responsiveness that strength comes from release and re-engagement, not from Mula Bandha 24/7. Any muscle that's held in tension constantly ultimately becomes tight and weak, and we want free and strong. And we're keeping that block. Find the neutral spine here for a moment, and we're going to just do half of the bird dog with just our arms. So left arm out in front of you, and this is unusual because normally if we do half of a bird dog, it's with our leg. So pay attention to how it feels to just have your spine start to engage, your shoulders start to engage, and we're still gently hugging that block. finding that sense of core stability from the pelvic floor starting first. And then we're going to release the block and lift that opposite leg, your right leg, up in the air. Now, you might have lost a little bit of awareness of the pelvic floor, but gain that 360 torso support where you feel that wrapping around you. Reach into the arm and leg, find your breath, and as you exhale, let's bring, oops, the block's probably in the way, so move that out of the way. Bring your elbow and knee coming underneath you to touch. Imagine the block still there between your legs, so you have activity going on in your pelvic floor, but it's not guarded. And then come again, elbow and knee underneath. Inhale, bringing that long spine, hand and knee coming down onto the ground. Move your spine around. You should feel like your glutes are working. So activating the pelvic floor will not take away the action of the glutes, but we want to share the burden so that we're not just relying on our big glutes to do the stabilizing. They're prime movers of extension, but they're not really built for this kind of subtle stabilization that the pelvic floor is built for. Let's change sides. So start with the block between your shins again, finding that hugging in, a little bit of compression against the block, but not so much where you're feeling like you're moving into a posterior tilt. Staying nice and neutral, and just a little awareness, like a flashlight you turned the lights on in your pelvic floor. How's your breath? Okay, let's start with just our arm. This time our right arm, thumb up, lifting out in front of us. Find that stabilization. Maybe your glutes are starting to turn on. And then when you're ready, we're going to release the block. Maybe take it out of there so it's not in the way. Bring it off to the side. And we're going to straighten our left leg out behind you. Bird dog. Bird dog's one of the most low back friendly stabilizers. You know, even when you're not doing so well, this is a great pose to incorporate. Take a deep breath in. Find your core support, that cylinder of support, especially on your exhales. And then we'll start to move. So when your next exhale arises, we're going to draw that elbow and knee underneath, finding the pelvic floor, finding that core support, using your glutes appropriately, stretching out, and then drawing in. And then hand down, knee down, come back to child's pose. Settle your hips back toward your heels and just rest for a moment, finding breath. Come to dog pose when you feel ready for it, feeling that reach and length again. And now just to dance a little bit in this internal rotation, let's take our right knee and cross it to the midline so it kind of moves in front of your left knee. Lift that left hip up and then switch sides. And then find neutral, lengthening through your spine. And let's walk our feet forward, coming to Uttanasana. Bend your knees a lot. Let your back relax. Soften your spine like a waterfall down. Inhale for a halfway lift, growing spacious in your spine. And then exhale and relax again. Finding up, arms lifting to the sky, feeling that extension. Open up, maybe lean back a little bit, maybe a cactus arm on your next inhale. Feel that big open heart. And then exhale and round your spine, forearms to touch. Again, up, big breath in. Exhale, swan dive forward. And enjoy something so simple but so nice in your body. Halfway lift. Spine grows. Exhale and melt back down. Step your left foot back. Right foot is in front. Finding that lunge, open up those hip flexors of the back leg. Let's bend and straighten, feeling into those long lever muscles of your hamstrings, your hip flexors, just enjoying breath and movement. Ground yourself in your lunge, get steady. You might, because of what we're gonna do when we get up there, you might wanna take that right foot out to the right just a little bit more, a little bit wider stance. So everybody get your legs a little wider, and it might feel weird, like, ooh, my legs are so wide apart, but let that happen. And then come on up to maybe a different kind of feeling in your crescent lunge. Reach the arms up, and we're gonna turn toward our right leg and stretch a little bit forward. Don't go far. And you can stay upright too if that's a little too much for your back. And then we're gonna place two hands on our thigh and let the back leg internally rotate a little bit. Widen your sit bones. Coming back up, feeling that extension. We're gonna turn to the long edge of your mat. So we're nice and wide in your legs, and come down to an externally rotated pose, a deep wide squat. Elbows in front of knees. Enjoy the opening of those inner thighs. Maybe your weight wants to rock a little bit from one side to the other, whatever feels good. Coming all the way back up to stand, standing star. Turn back to the front of your mat, dog pose. Long, spacious spine. Let's bring our left foot in front. Coming to a lunge, hands can go on blocks. Feeling that extension of the back leg. All right, let's go back and forth between some lengthening of that front leg, bending. Pay very close attention. How's your back doing in this pose? When you straighten that leg, do you pop up and round? Can you keep extension? Keep moving with your breath. All right, so find your lunge. Take that left foot out to the left or right foot out to the right. So we're nice and really wide in our lunge. And then we're gonna come on up. It's an awkward crescent lunge. Reaching your arms up, you might feel weird because your legs are so wide. Okay. And we're gonna turn a little bit toward that front leg. You can lengthen forward a little bit. You can put your hands on your hips. You can stay upright, but just feel that back hip slightly internally rotate. Widen your sit bones. Ground into your front. Right, and then come back up. Again, turn to the wide edge of your mat. One more time, a deep squat. Drop your hips in line with your knees. And then we'll turn back to the front of your mat for another dog pose. Take your legs wide on your mat now to the edges. Turn your toes in so that your whole femur bone down to your foot internally rotates. Feel the widening of your pelvic floor. Widen your sit bones. That diamond gets broader. And then come forward into a plank. You can put your feet back to neutral if you want. Find your breath. And then we're going to come all the way down to the ground. Roll the shoulders a little bit. Find your way into a cobra pose. Big open chest. Enjoy the extension of your spine. Melt and fold. Any variation that feels good in your body. One more time. Lifting into some extension. Exhale and relax. Come on up onto all fours and let your spine release. You can wag your tail. Rocking from side to side. All right, now we did this yesterday. We're going to repeat it. Okay, so get close to a wall with a block. All right, so you're going to put your feet on the wall, your spine on the ground, and you're going to be far enough away from the wall where your knees land over your hips. So if you get too close to the wall, your knees will be too forward over your chest. So you want to be far enough away where your knees land over your pelvis. Stick a block between your knees. Okay. Or between your thighs, kind of wherever's comfortable. I wouldn't go super high at your groin. I would stick the blocks somewhere, knees or a little bit lower than that. And you can have the block at the middle width or the narrow width. What feels normal? What feels comfortable? What feels natural to you? That's where you should land. Okay. All right, so take a deep breath. Just relax your body for a moment. And then when you're ready, we're gonna hover your right foot off the ground or off the wall. Now try not to let your hip hike up toward your shoulder. Keep your hips neutral on the ground. And then we're gonna pull our foot out to the right and then draw it back into neutral. So we're hugging the block with our knees and we're just moving the shin. The foot is moving out. It's still pointing straight up toward the sky, but we're pulling our foot out to the right and then back in. All the while trying to keep our hips and our knees neutral. So we're not allowing our whole torso to kind of hike around. We want to stay with our hips on the ground in that neutral setting. Now, I don't know about you, but my TFL starts to cramp a little bit when I do this. It's such a strong engagement of that muscle. Now, if you're not aware of your TFL, it's what you're feeling right now. Okay, that's one of the muscles. And it's the small muscle where your IT band is the tendon for this small muscle. Okay, and then when you're ready, relax that foot down onto the wall and just let your hips rest for a moment. Keep the block between your knees. So the TFL, that little muscle right at your hip, is responsible for internal rotation. It helps with abduction, like bringing your leg away from the midline. And it also is a part of hip flexion. It assists the psoas and all the hip flexors to flex your knee toward your chest. So it's got 3 different movement patterns that it's involved in. And it's this little tiny muscle with this giant fascial tendon. We all know the IT band, right? So the IT band is the tendon for the TFL, the tensor fascia lata, TFL. Let's move to the left. Over your left foot, just a little teeny bit away from the wall, just enough where you have maneuverability. Keep your knees and pelvis neutral. And we're gonna pull your left shin out to the left, toes still pointing straight up, and then bring it back in to neutral. So we're just going into that internal rotation of the hip and back to neutral. Now, this is not an action that we do a lot of in yoga. I mean, we do some. I try to incorporate a little internal rotation every class, even if it's just windshield wipering your knees. But, you know, to have this concentrated action shows you how much strength is really required to allow our legs to open in this way. Now we're going to do it on the ground in a moment, which is in some ways a little easier, but see what you can start feeling outside of that tension of the TFL. What's your pelvic floor feeling like? Is it hard to keep your knees and your hips neutral? Do you want to compensate with lots of other parts of your body? Even your upper traps want to do the work of your hips. All right, and then feet onto the wall again. Relax. Now let's slide a little bit away from the wall so we can put our feet into the wall. So instead of, or your feet on the ground, and you can get the block out of there. Let's put our feet on the ground. And then have your feet a little wider than your hips and just windshield wiper your knees. Going back and forth more passively now, moving into both internal rotation and external rotation of the hips. And I'm hoping you feel a little fatigue in that TFL area. Breathing well. All right, and then for a moment, put your feet, your toes right up against the wall and just let your legs fall into Supta Baddha Konasana. If you have your blocks handy, you can slide them underneath your outer legs, your knees somewhere, so that you're just very restful in this pose. If you don't have blocks and you don't feel comfortable hanging with your legs, you can take your fists underneath your outer femur bones and just let your legs rest on your fists. Just have a moment to relax in external rotation after that deep internal rotation work. All right, and then pick up your knees. Let's roll to one side and come back to your mat. If you moved away, if you're, at a wall. All right, now we're going to do a very similar action, but from a different plane. So we're going to lie down. Look at me if you've never done this before. We're gonna lie down on our belly, hands underneath our forehead. We're gonna bring our left knee up toward our chest. Now it doesn't have to be high. It can be at a 90-degree angle, like right at your hip. It can be a little lower than that. Just kind of find a comfortable place for your hip to be. And then we're going to lift your shin up toward the sky and release your shin and foot down toward the ground. So the knee is going to stay on the ground and your lower leg is going to lift. So we're trying to have, you don't strive for a 90-90, strive for your femur bone being out from your hip at a 90-degree angle, and strive for your shin to be at a 90-degree angle to your femur bone. But don't worry if you don't get there. You can be less angled, okay? So your knee can be lower, not in line with your hip, and your heel can be a little closer in toward your midline. So just, kind of discover what's available for your hip joint. And then we're going to lift the shin straight up toward the sky, foot lifting to the sky, and then lowering it back down. Keep your head on your hands so that you have, you're not relying on a lot of paraspinal muscles to do this. Okay, your movement might be small. You might be like, oh, I don't have much range of motion in this internal rotation. And that's, something to notice. Now, while you're doing this, see if you can feel the pelvic floor muscle, that obturator, stretch open. And feel free to take your time. You can rest, relax for a minute, and then do another rep. You don't have to just keep moving. Try to be very aware instead of you just got to bust out 3 sets of 10 or something like that. Think I'm deeply aware of what's happening in my hip joint, my low back, my SI joint, my pelvic floor. So notice all the connections that you have here. All right, and then when you're ready, straighten your legs for a moment. Just relax, and we'll move to the other side. So strive for 90-90. Don't worry if you don't get there, okay? And it's normal if you've not done much of this for your hips to cramp. So just be very kind to yourself. You don't have to do a lot of reps. I'd rather you move very slowly with breaks so that you're very aware of what's happening. Pay attention to that pelvic floor muscle that we're trying to get aware of, your obturator, so that you can feel your way into the openness of your pelvic floor as you lift and lower. Now, if you find yourself like, oh my gosh, my hips just cramping like crazy, that's something to just very much be aware of, that this is an action that's not, set well in your body. Okay, so it doesn't matter how high you lift your leg. It can be 1 inch off the ground. It can be much further. Just find your pathway. Notice the rest of your body. And then relax. We're going to take our legs to neutral. Pick up your feet and just windshield wiper your knees left and right. All right, come up onto all fours. Move your hips around, maybe move your spine around. And then stretch back towards child's pose. Just let your hips relax. That's a lot of work. So you all have to tell me how your hips feel after class around this. But it's not, when you isolate internal rotation like that, it's a pattern in the body that we're like, ooh, what's that? That's often not something super familiar that we're aware of. So integrate some of that awareness that you just cultivated. All right, now we're just going to kind of move toward the torso again, just a little bit. One more strong active pose. We're going to take a side forearm plank. So We're going to come onto our side, our right side. Your forearm is at a right angle. Okay, now remember, when you do this pose, you can lift your hips up and come into the fullness. You can also have your top foot in front of you, foot on the ground, so that you have a little extra support to lift up into. So your choice of side plank, forearm side plank. Now feel the support of that one side of your spine. Breathing deeply. Relax and melt. And we'll come to the second side. The second side is not really available for me, so I'm not gonna lift for caring for my shoulder well. Okay, so the forearm is perpendicular to your mat. The top foot can come in front and put on the foot on the ground, or your legs can stack. We're gonna lift your hips high, finding your breath, opening your chest. Maybe your other arm lifts to the sky. Feel that work. My hips are on the ground, but you're lifting your hips up. Feel that work of one side of your spine. You might even feel like you can hug your forearm and your legs toward each other. So you feel that stiffness and anchoring on the one side of your spine. And then relax and melt down. Let's come on to your back. Bring your knees into your chest and rock a little bit, swaying from side to side. Breathing well. Let's put our feet down. Okay. Just a little bit of bridging. You don't have to go high, so maybe playing with a little anterior tilting of the pelvis, posterior tilting of the pelvis. Maybe you lift your hips off the ground. Maybe you drop one hip at a time and you kind of move your hips through a figure eight. Just see what feels good to kind of help you re-knit a lot of these parts of your body together. And then rest down. We're all going to do a bridge together. So block in between your thighs. Just like when we had the block between our shins, when we did those cat-cows earlier, or when we had the block between our feet in those that butterfly action, or the block between our knees for the internal rotation. This block helps us find the pelvis. So before you even lift up into a bridge, a gentle hug on the block. Notice what becomes alive. Can you feel the deep, low transverse abdominis muscles in your belly? Can you feel the pelvic floor? And you don't even have to squeeze very hard on the block for these muscles to be like, oh, there we go. That's alive. That's welcome in my body. So have that engagement. And then we're going to lift the hips up. Now you might feel like your butt cheeks want to do all the work. Just imagine as you climb up into the bridge on your shoulders, that if the block was going to go somewhere, it was going to roll down toward the ground. We've done this with dog pose with the block between our thighs before. See what it feels like to imagine that the block is going to fall down instead of spring up. So this will reduce the overexertion of the glutes and turn on some of those more small and internal muscles. Ground the inner feet, that might help. Sometimes grounding the outer feet activates the glutes a little more. Ground the inner feet and release the block toward the ground. And then relax. Now that's not to say that you don't want your glutes to turn on. Of course you want your glutes to turn on when you're in a bridge. That's the action of the glutes, to push your pelvis forward and move into extension of the hip joints. That's the full action of your glutes. So you want them to turn on, but you don't want them to be so turned on that everything else turns off. All right, one more time. We're going to come up into a bridge, ground the inner feet, feel your glutes lift you. When you lift your pelvis like this, you're moving into extension of the hip joints. Feel how the glutes are the prime movers of this. And then release the block a little bit down toward the ground. Keeping the glutes turned on, four corners of feet, release the block. All right, and then lower your pelvis down. feet on the ground, windshield wipering your knees left and right. All right, and then we're gonna move our hips over to the right. Twist deeply now. Knees drop left, open up your chest. Breathe well into your spine. Back to neutral. Hips go the other way. Knees up and drop left. So I hope some of what we did today is kind of broadening your scope of what it means to take care of your back. You know, we can, you know, the thing we always hear is you need a strong core to have a strong back. But what does that really mean? Can you think of your core in so many different ways that it's this cylinder of support, but it's also, you know, the action of the pelvic floor. It's also the action of your side bodies. It's the action of your how your hips move in space. The action of your breath. It's not just navel to spine. All right, let's come back to neutral. What else do you need? Do you need anything else? Let's go ahead and find Shavasana as you're ready. If there's something your body needs, go ahead and take it. And always remember that Shavasana really enjoys warmth. Your body likes to be warm, so if you at all are a little chilled or feel like you might get chilled, grab a blanket, put it over you, put a sweater back on, socks, whatever it is that you need. And then you might find that you need some support underneath your knees. Sometimes that can be very helpful. You can create a little bolster with 2 blocks and a blanket. So whatever your body requires to get deeply restful. And then when you settle into the ground, let's begin to focus on our breathing. As you inhale, can you feel the pelvic floor part of your cylinder broaden and widen and accommodate the need for the diaphragm to move your organs? So even the pelvic floor accommodates and makes room for the organs to descend as the diaphragm descends to let the lungs expand. And then as the exhale happens, feel that cylinder kind of condense back to the center, including your pelvic floor drawing in and up. There's nothing you need to pull and push and prod. We're not, you know, lifting tissues out of a tissue box or, you know, all the other pelvic floor little strengtheners that you might have been taught somewhere along the way, Kegels, things like that. Just let the natural movement happen. The breath pattern includes your belly, your back, and your pelvic floor. Feel the weight of our body drop down again. Head, arms, spine, pelvis, legs. Fingers and toes. And come into the kind of movement that supports your transition. Finding your way up to sit very slowly and carefully. So take your time. There's no rush. Heck, you can just ignore me completely and stay in Shavasana for 10 more minutes. Find your way, if you're following me, to a seat. Sit up on the edge of something again. And just notice how your pelvis, your pelvic floor, your hips, your back, your breath all feel. Place your hands together and let's offer all this focus and concentration. Let's condense it into a deep offering of intention, of love and kindness toward another. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.